And our last speaker, Helen Rayson-Hill, will be introduced by Brett. And her book is Eleanor the Firebrand Queen. Now based in Melbourne, Helen lived for a time in Brisbane, where she was manager of the Australian Elizabethan Theatre Trust. For 2 years, she coordinated the National Arts Week in Brisbane, working closely with the State Ministry of the Arts and the City Council. Helen has performed on the stage in both cities and on television in Neighbours and Something's in the Air. Helen has long been interested in medieval history, especially in the life of Eleanor of Aquitaine. This is the first in a series of historical novels about this medieval feminist, and we're really hoping this is going to find its way to the silver screen at some particular point.
Well, good afternoon. My name's Brett Heath. I'm a friend of Helen Rayson-Hill, and I'm delighted to introduce Helen this afternoon and her fine book, Eleanor the Firebrand Queen. Helen is a polymath. She's a teacher, painter, an arts administrator, a traveller, when we all could do so, an author and an actor. It was the actors as we first met in Shakespeare. She was Dionysa, the wicked queen, and I was Pericles, Prince of Tyre, many years ago. We haven't seen each other since I think we did that production, so it's delightful that she could return to Brisbane from Melbourne and risk lockdown to be here for the launch this afternoon. Eleanor, which is the subject of her book, is a 12th century queen, first of France and then of England. And she was a modern woman, intelligent, forthright and independent. And it's the triumph of this fine book, the first in a series I'm told, that Helen gets into the head of Eleanor and lets us see the world of the 12th century through her eyes, through the ages of 12 to 32. And we see her and the world through her journals, although I trust Eleanor is not an unreliable narrator like the author of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I think we can rely upon her as far as I can tell. Eleanor refuses to accept the decorative role that is forced upon her by kings and princes and priests, and manages to make her own luck and her own life. Historical novels matter because history repeats itself and people don't change. People have a deep and abiding need to be lied to. There are the rulers and there are the ruled, there are those who learn from history and there are those who do not. Now, Eleanor has been described as a medieval feminist, but she's more than just a label. She is, on my reading of this book, a knowing and confident young woman who it's a pleasure to spend time with. It's also a pleasure to introduce now the author of Eleanor the Firebrand Queen, my friend, Helen Rayson-Hill.
Well, thank you, Brett. It's also an honour today to be with three other authors who have been most inspiring. Eleanor was inspiring, and I became absolutely addicted to her about 30 years ago. And what became a sort of a curiosity morphed into research. Just recently, in our Parliament, we have witnessed treatment of women, which we have found, in many cases, quite abhorrent, especially in the power of our Parliament. Eleanor, next year, it'll be 900 years since she was born. And I ask myself, what has changed? Because Eleanor was treated very, very badly, particularly as a young girl. Her father died when she was 13 and she was the beloved daughter of William X of Aquitaine. He had spent his life educating her and her little sister, and at the age of 6 she was declared his heir. Most unusual in those days, because usually a man who, in this case his wife had died, usually remarried to try and produce a male heir. But no, at the age of 6 he declared Eleanor his heir. Anyway, to get a little bit further ahead, when he died on his way to Compostela on a pilgrimage, Eleanor was left alone. But before he died, William made her under the guardianship of the King of France at the time, who was Louis VI. Louis VI came from a poverty-stricken area, which is now virtually just the little island in the middle of Paris and a little bit around the edge. The Aquitaine stretched from the Loire Valley to the Pyrenees. So she was a very, very wealthy little girl. She was also highly intelligent. In fact, I suspect with the research that I've done that she was more than just intelligent, that she was actually gifted. She spoke at least 3 languages and possibly, I think she learned English. Sometimes some historians say no, she didn't, but I think she probably did, and she certainly understood enough of it anyhow. But also she was fluent in Languedoc, which was her dialect, Latin, Greek, and Languedoil she had to learn when she married Louis. The old king, of course, thought he had manna from heaven. So he promptly married her off to his 15-year-old son. So you can imagine a little girl of 13, her beloved papa dies, she has to leave her beautiful home and marry a strange boy. And believe you me, I believe Louis was quite strange. Anyway, I'll just read you a little bit of the early days of Eleanor's life in her journal that she kept, as Brett said. I have written it as it's her thoughts, her emotions as to how she feels about the world around her. My maids laid out many gowns for me to choose to wear for my introduction to Prince Louis. At least this is exciting. I like wearing pretty gowns. Every seamstress within the palace has been weaving, embroidering, and stitching for my trousseau. The lace on the chemises has been made by the nuns of the abbey. It is so fine, so beautifully finished. My lace-making attempts always look clumsy because I get the bobbins tangled. Also, I do not practice. Nilla likes that sort of occupation and is more adroit than I am. I chose a yellow gown embroidered with many brightly coloured flowers. It was also stitched with precious gems and pearls that will sparkle like stars when I move. The chemise was made of the finest linen, with lace at the neck, sleeves and hem. The girdle for my waist was woven in gold thread. Renée said I will be a marvel for all to see. I was bathed and scrubbed, no more inky fingers, and my hair washed and rinsed in lemon juice to highlight the colour. Finally, my tangled tresses were brushed and brushed till my scalp tingled. My body was scented in a specially prepared perfume made from an essence of lily of the valley. My cheeks were given a hint of rouge, my eyes rimmed in kohl. It took hours to get me dressed in the beautiful gown, with all its intricate lacings and long train. I think the bells rang more than thrice before I was finally on my way to the audience chamber, which was especially hung with new tapestries and laid with carpets from Byzantium for my first meeting with Prince Louis. My maids, Renée and the pages, escorted me to my throne. Everyone was fussing around arranging my train, making sure the crown of Aquitaine sat straight on my head. It was altered to fit me. It was heavier than any coronet I had ever worn before. I felt like an ornament on display. Everyone stepped back as the doors opened, and there stood my betrothed. Prince Louis looked as ill at ease as I felt. There was a deathly silence, no fanfares. Prince Louis was surrounded by attendants who looked like priests and nuns at a wake. They were all darkly robed. They reminded me of the black cafard that scurry in dark corners. The prince wore a plain cream tunic. He looked like a monk. Archbishop Geoffrey entered the chamber with a dour-faced French cleric, the Abbé Sujet, who made me feel uneasy. They escorted Prince Louis to stand in front of me. He gave a little nod. Then he sat next to me. After the introductions were over, as quickly as they flurried in, they flurried out. A blur of faces and strange voices, all speaking in Languedoil. Papa had not taught us the language of the French, saying it was barbaric. My entourage followed the French. Prince Louis and I sat aloof from one another. A long silence ensued. I am sometimes considered garrulous, but I could think of nothing to say. I glanced at Prince Louis out of the corner of my eye. He was staring at the floor, his hands clasped in what could be prayer. I wondered if I was that frightening. I got a little braver and managed to look at him more carefully. His hair was fair and curly. He seemed to be slight in build. He was pale, his nose a little prominent, but mine is a little aquiline too. I could not see his eyes. I was about to ask him if he would like some wine when a piercing twitter caught our attention. My heart sank. Simeon was capering across the top of the tapestries on the opposite wall. Prince Louis let out a cry. Even in Languedoc I understood the word Satan. As Simeon is small and black with a long tail, I suppose he does look like a little devil. Prince Louis stared in horror and made the sign of the cross. He looked so funny I had difficulty